This is Ready, Set, Renovate, a podcast about remodeling your home with a contractor you trust. Daniel Builders builds trust in 5 ways. One of those ways is competence. Competence means you know what you're doing. When a pizza place makes a great pizza, what happens? You go back, and you trust you'll get another great pizza. We see the same thing happening when it comes to remodeling homes. Some of our clients start with one major remodel, but go on to do 2, 3, 4 more. When it comes to carpentry skills, how does one develop that level of competence? On this episode, we have 2 gifted carpenters who help us answer that question. As you'll hear, they took different paths to honing their expertise. Sean Harvey and Sam Parkinson compare an old school approach to learning carpentry to learning under the tutelage of YouTube. It's a content-rich conversation and could prove helpful to anyone seeking a greater level of competence. So let's get to it. Some words out there are used so often that, and by so many people, that they start to lose their meaning. And one of those words you could say is being a carpenter. What is being a carpenter? To some, it means being able to frame. To others, it may mean being able to frame and run trim. But the 2 guys I have with me on this podcast are both known as carpenters. They're not currently in that role, but they came up through the ranks as carpenters and wanted to just get their ideas on what a carpenter actually is and their path to becoming a carpenter. And so, Sean, I want to start with you. You actually trained under somebody to develop the skills of being a carpenter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. My dad actually had his own company as a carpenter. Had his own business for about 40 years. And I started at, 10, carrying bundles of shingles to the roof and sweeping floors and stuff like that, and learned over the years skills of, the trade and, carpentry predominantly.
Would you see that often where somebody would come in claiming to be a carpenter, but you quickly realize they didn't possess certain skills or traits that should characterize
at that time, you mean? Or
yes, yeah.
My dad,
kind of making the contrast between who's really in that and who's really not in that category.
Yeah, growing up in it, my dad was a sole proprietor, owner, operator. He did not really have a lot of employees, so I didn't really have the opportunity, as a kid, to kind of see that dynamic at play. But yeah, we definitely see that at play frequently as I've come up through construction. That happens all the time.
Those who claim to be and those who really are not. Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, I went through that phase a little bit myself, thinking that I knew more about framing at one point, getting hired on a framing crew and having the framing, foreman basically be like, "You don't know anything." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that I didn't know anything." Well, even just coming up through it, sometimes
when did you finally, what was a threshold where you finally felt comfortable referring to yourself as a carpenter, where you knew, okay, I am truly a carpenter at this point? Was that 10 years into practicing carpentry? Was there a threshold there?
I think, well, as you said, right, definitions can change over time, right? Historically speaking, a carpenter is different, was different 100 years ago than what a carpenter is in many ways now.
Yeah.
As the industry has changed, a carpenter, historically would, they would literally hand plane their own moldings. They would know how to use a variety of different hand tools to execute an art in many ways. As the industry has grown and changed, what a carpenter looks like now is
completely different.
Yeah, you have power tools to accomplish what used to be done by hand. You have millworks that produce, factory produced moldings so that every profile is perfectly matched. There's no hand planing of moldings or things like that. We're in many ways, carpenters have moved from fabricators to installers. They used to create something, and now we just take product and we create a product from product. Mm-hmm. So, it really has changed in many ways.
Would you agree with that being a carpenter is more about installing than it is about actually building, creating?
I'd say so. Going back to what Sean said, we're provided all the products, and there's skill involved in installing said products and making sure that reveals are looking great or that things are properly installed so that they survive the test of time. But that was something that the guys back then could also do, but they were installing stuff that they typically crafted themselves or shaped themselves. And so that's an art that's been lost in the level of craftsmanship.
Yeah, it
That's,
sounds like there's a little more involved in that.
yeah, it's probably
Level of
it's probably
carpentry.
gone forever, you know. So, but yeah.
Well, you were talking, Sean, about learning under other carpenters, your dad being one of those,
Yep.
and under his tutelage. Would you call that an apprenticeship? Did you ever enter into a formal apprenticeship at any point in your path to becoming a carpenter?
I was never in what would be considered, a formal apprenticeship. There's a lot of schools now that do training and teaching that are really great for all the different trades. Fantastic resources that are available there. But I was personally never in an apprenticeship. It really was. I learned from my father until I got my first job working for another company, and found out how little I really paid attention to what my dad was trying to teach me, and then kind of had to catch up quickly to be where I probably should have been for the number of years that I've been doing it. And, and just learn from a variety of guys. What one carpenter used to say is, steal with your eyes. You watch and pay attention to what the people, who are skilled and knowledgeable that are, around you are doing.
You pick up.
And you pick up what they're doing. You watch them, do things and, just learn on the job, on the job training, from.
Well, speaking of watching, Sam, you, correct me if I'm wrong, you actually learned a lot simply from watching others, but not necessarily in their presence, but on a video screen, like on YouTube or something, watching carpenters teach those tricks of the trade. Is that true? Is that how you hone some of your carpentry ability?
Absolutely. I certainly, I don't know a good percentage, maybe about 30% probably over time is probably what I've picked up online. I don't think, with that said, that you can replace in the field experience. And some of the best experience you can get too is if there is somebody who is willing to train you. I think that's just irreplaceable. And the value with that is you have somebody who's giving you some information based on the exact task that you're doing right at that moment. And that's not something that you can go find necessarily out there. But one thing I will say is that having that as an additional supplement to learning, I think can accelerate your ability to get from point A to point B much quicker than maybe in the past when you were kind of limited to whoever it was that you were working with. And that may be somebody who is fully invested and kind of sees themselves as a coach or a mentor. But I would say that especially in trades, that's not necessarily anymore what you're going to find in most places. They might train you to kind of do the minimum task that you're required to do, but to be able to be the guy that might be able to get to that lead carpenter status, or to be able to be what you might consider a journeyman carpenter, being able to get a variety of perspectives when it comes to this is how these guys do this particular task, this is how these guys do this particular task. Not one of them is necessarily wrong, but you get to kind of pick and choose what's best for what you may be doing. And so I utilized it as primarily a supplement. And the analogy that I like to think of when it comes to utilizing online learning is kind of like, instead of riding an escalator up, to the next level, you're walking up that escalator as it's moving up. And so
it accelerates the
process. Accelerates the process at which you can get to the next level. But it cannot replace in the field training. Otherwise, I think you pretty much end up with, I think if a person who's primarily only doing stuff online is probably someone who's just a weekend warrior, or someone who's just doing DIY. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a stark difference between experienced professionals who do this for a living versus somebody who's trying to do a project at their house. There's a big difference there.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, when it comes to supplementing that training through, like YouTube videos, how do you discern between this guy really knows what he's talking about, I need to listen, versus somebody who maybe just trying to grow their YouTube channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some discernment there, and it might be harder to find if you have no experience kind of filtering through the noise that's out there. But there are guys at which you can see that they are doing it for a living, and they're not guys that are just putting out content. And you can even see a lot of ways by the way in which they make their videos. A lot of the guys that I follow, it's not about just pure entertainment value, you know, or just the quick jumps and, you know, from this thing to this thing, or, you know, you know.
It's about real content,
Yeah,
right?
it's getting to the real content. You see the tools that they use, you see the processes. And also, I mean, anything like this, you might go and test something in the field, and this is where working in the field makes a huge difference. You may find that, I don't think that that's true. Or you are hearing something on the other side. Like, you probably shouldn't follow any specific person like wholesale, but you can follow multiple people and then get a general idea about this is the same thing that I keep seeing over and over and over and over, you know, across all of these videos. That means it's probably getting at the right way to go about it.
Yeah. I think that's really, you know, a lot of wisdom in that, because the reality of any type of research is, right, you want to have 2 to 3 sources, right? If you're going to document and say, this is really true, this is a fact, right? Like, how many people are, like, where are you finding your sources is one thing, right? Are they legitimate sources? You know, like, there have been magazines over the year, like Fine, you know, Woodworking or Fine Home Building, that, you know, they're legitimate, they're quantifiable. Like, the people who write articles for those magazines, and this was, you know, 20, 25 years ago. Don't know if those magazines exist anymore, but, you know, the people who wrote articles for those magazines, right? It's a form of research. You know, people who wrote those articles, though, you knew who they were. Like, they were well-known quantities. They were legitimate. You could trace them back to
Experts in their field.
business, or experts in their field that were known to be experts in their field. You know, and so you knew what you were reading had, you know, some reality to it, you know? And it's the same thing with any form of research. YouTube would do the same, right? Cross-reference it. Go back, find out who you're listening to. Why should I listen to this person? Watch 3 videos about the same thing and find out how much of the information actually overlaps.
Yeah, and Sam makes an excellent point. If it's all about the entertainment value, it may not be substantive. Like, it may not be actually useful information, as, you know, people are just trying to promote a brand or market something. But you're looking for certain characteristics, certain details that shows this is actually useful. This is somebody who is providing something that's substantive. Now go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say is, probably early on when I was in that journey of trying to find stuff online to be able to supplement what I was learning on site, you know, I probably had maybe 15 to 20 different people that I would follow, and get a variety of, you know, knowledge from each of them. But over time, that list consolidated more and more to maybe a top 5, because over time, and you continue to see that you're pulling more and more from these individuals, and it's making a huge difference for you on site, for the quality of your work, for the efficiency of your work. And when you have that happening, you kind of, these are like proven entities, getting back to what you were just saying, to where it's like, you know, I don't know if this is exactly right, but I'm going to give it a shot because this guy I've come to trust like I would a mentor or somebody, because in all reality,
He's proven right so many times.
He's proven right so many times, and in all reality, you have these people who are, I mean, I'm sure some of them get compensated in some ways, but there is something to be said about guys putting out information for free for you to see, because, you know, they may not have somebody that works with them specifically that they can pour into, but they want to be able to put that kind of information out there for,
because they love it.
yeah,
They
because
just
they
love
love it,
helping
they're
others.
passionate about it, and you can see that pretty quickly on your.
That's a good point. Good insight. Both you guys are in leadership positions at Daniel Builders. Build director here, Sean, and project manager, Sam. You guys have had to have conversations with guys, I'm assuming pretty frequently, to let them know exactly where they stand as far as on that spectrum of carpentry ability. Can you give us a little insight into how those conversations go? Like, what's coming up? How are you evaluating them? How are you finally deciding, yes, you've reached a level of lead carpenter, which is the top level that we have here at Daniel Builders. If you're a lead carpenter, you're among the elite among the carpenters here. But give us a little insight into those conversations. I think that could be helpful for somebody who is looking to work in this field, that they'll one day have to be sitting across the table from one of you guys.
Yeah. I mean, the very title lead carpenter has 2 distinct aspects to it. One is carpenter. The other one is leader. So when you're looking for a lead carpenter, you're not only looking for somebody who has the skill to accomplish the task and to do that task efficiently, but you're looking for someone who has the ability to also, you know, pull in the people around them, lead a crew of people, and be able to also, disseminate and transfer the information that they have to the other people on site, whether that's a specification that they need to follow on how it's supposed to be built, or just the practice of this is how you're supposed to do, this is how you're supposed to build this. We're going to follow these steps. You're going to have to use this type of fastener, and make sure that the guys who are more junior carpenters in the company and on their team are going to be able to, not only execute it, but execute it well and follow the leadership of the individual.
Sure.
Acknowledge them as a leader, but also have the other person be able to actually just purely lead. Are you comfortable and confident to tell people what they need to do, or that they made a mistake and that it needs to be fixed? Yeah. And we're not going to leave it that way.
So there's a quality control element to that too, right? Where you're examining other people's work and helping them correct it. Would you agree with that, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. I would also say that if you're looking at somebody from just starting day one to someone who is a seasoned lead carpenter who's more on that journeyman level, I think one of the big things that happens over this journey here is when you're just starting, the only things that you can even focus on are just for you, that one little task, that one little skill you're learning right in front of you. And as you move forward through this spectrum, your perspective becomes higher and higher and higher, to the point where you can think, you've acquired some skills, and now you can be thinking about how those skills or doing this particular task affects things before and after. And then as you move a little bit further, you're starting to see how everything that you're doing affects trades around you, affects the project overall. And, that perspective, ultimately, you're getting up to where a 30,000-foot view.
Yeah, that's
where
good.
You're looking even beyond just the tasks you're doing. It's how it affects the whole project. It affects every other tradesperson involved. And so I think over that course, that's where you're kind of going from a apprentice level carpenter to
very narrow focus.
You're right in front of you, to where you are looking at the job closer to what a project manager does in its totality, seeing how everything's connected, because you've been there, done that. When I do this early on with these skills, this is what's going to happen if I do it this particular way. And so I think that's a pretty big thing that happens. And then I think the other thing, of course, is what Sean was talking about. It really gets to the leader aspect of it, and it ties this whole conversation back together when it's that person also kind of taking on the mantle to then go back and start helping these younger guys teach those skills. Think of themselves as a mentor, as a trainer, as a leader, not just in getting the task done, but then helping these guys come up, so that you can kind of have this replace yourself mentality.
Yeah, that's so good. That's really good for anybody who's considering a career in carpentry. Some words of wisdom there coming from guys who came up through the ranks. What do you see as the future of carpentry? Is it, you feel like it's you mentioned early on that years ago carpentry included fabricating and installing, and now it's more along the lines of installing. Do you foresee another major shift in the field?
I mean, it's hard to predict things like that because construction technology is advancing so rapidly, right? But one of the things that I think is important to understand in this conversation is, one of the reasons why YouTube has become such a strong point of learning construction is because there is a lack of mentors. I think what's happened over maybe 20 to 30 years since I've been in the industry, and I've seen this, maybe it was happening prior, but lead carpenter pay really did not keep up with the times. And
they were being underpaid
basically. And what you found, and this happened for me, is at some point you hit a level where you're like, I'm not making enough pay for the knowledge and the professionalism that I bring to the table. I'm going to go out and start my own business. So what you have is, even if it's a lot of owner operators, guys who are not starting, a company of 50 people like we have here, but you have an owner operator who just wants to make better pay than he can make working for somebody else, goes out, starts his own business, but he doesn't have really any business ability.
Savvy, yeah.
So, my dad would be a perfect example of this, and he wouldn't be upset that I said it. My dad is an amazing carpenter, and he was a terrible businessman. He never really had a staff. He never grew a company. He just worked for himself because he knew he could get paid better working on his own. And the reality is that doing that, unless you're mentoring your son, you're not really mentoring anybody else. Yeah. And you're not passing on your knowledge, and you're not passing on information. So what we have in construction is a culture where a lot of younger guys are coming in, But we don't have people who have been doing this for 15, 20, 30 years as predominantly as it used to be, like when I was learning how to do the trade. So you don't have those guys who are 30, 40, 50 years old and still working for a company who have been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's very much a cultural reality that, people aren't passing on the information.
Interesting.
So we're going to YouTube as a resource, as Sam says,
YouTube's filling that void.
it's filling the gap. It's becoming a mentor,
Well, that is an interesting trend, an
Yeah.
interesting development. Would you agree with that? That's what's occurring as far as trends go?
Yeah, I mean, someone can fact check me on this, but I think I heard a statistic the other day about how by 2025 they're predicting that the online education industry is going to be a $325 billion industry. And I think that's a trend that goes far beyond, obviously, just construction or learning on, how to swing a hammer, do whatever online.
Right.
It's just something that's happening in our culture in general.
Right.
And I don't think that it's going to slow down. And I don't think other things that help are the fact that we don't necessarily have those guys you're talking about to pass down knowledge. It also speaks to, our overall education system, which I think people are just having an overall lack of trust in, or maybe feeling there's less value there to be offered. And that's an entirely different conversation. But I think it speaks to like kind of what's undergirding this, where it's affecting our industry, but I think it's also, kind of stretching out far wider
Other
than
fields,
the context in which we're speaking. And so I think it's something that's just going to continue that way. While I hope that people will begin to start feeling more pride in being a tradesperson or, doing construction, using your hands to do work, I think it's going to be an uphill battle, honestly. But I do think that online education is not going away.
Yeah.
Even if those people begin to step up or we have better trade schools or other things like that, I still think it's going to be a huge part.
Yeah. Sam makes a really good point too. If you look historically, if we look at a broader culture in America, historically speaking, the push for college education versus going into the trades became a huge push in maybe the 60s or 70s, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was supposed to, if you were smart, everybody should go to college, right? Get a college education. And
The trades were like a consolation prize.
I mean,
right?
it was like secondary citizens almost.
Yeah.
And it was this, stamp on your back if you're a blue collar worker. But I've said this for years, like, why do you want someone who is unintelligent or doesn't have the skill working on your car or working on your home? I want an electrician who said, I have an option. I'm intelligent enough and I've got the grades to go to either college or trade school.
Yeah.
I want the electrician who chose trade school and
that's
said,
a good insight.
This is where I want to be. This is the profession that I want to be in. I'm good at this. I'd rather work with my hands. Because you want smart people working on your most important assets, which is your home and your automobiles and things that are keeping your family safe
100%.
and that, you're living in.
Yes.
And
at Daniel Builders, we have the value trust. And what do we build trust on? Well, one of the things is competence.
Right.
And that's just what you're saying there. People trust those who are competent and not just punching a clock, not just saying, hey, I'm going to settle for this job. And it's the last thing I have, last option I have, so I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah. One of the last things I'll say is this is one of the things I didn't realize when I was getting into construction, but looking back in hindsight, and it's something that I've encouraged young guys in, is that construction or using your hands or being a tradesperson is like 100% a meritocracy. And the limit to what you can make in the trades is you. You are the ceiling, and what you are capable of doing, how good of a leader you can be, is 100% the cap at which you will stop earning. And that was something that for me, whether what I experienced as working retail or being a server or whatever, I mean, there's a whole lot of things that will confine you. Or even if you go work for a big corporation, you go to college and you end up being a cog in a wheel at some Fortune 500 company. You may have these tiers in which you cannot move forward regardless of how well it is that you work or how efficient you are, how much money you make the company.
Yeah.
And this is just my personality. I like being in a place or working on something where I have 100% control of what I can earn and what my potential is. And I can work and gain skills and knowledge and just continue to move up that ladder. It's super rewarding.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, you get to see exactly what it is that you're building.
That's another big point. At the end of the day, it's not like, what did I accomplish? You can actually see it, right? You're looking.
You can see it, and then you can, have nice pictures of it. You can remember it, and then you can also remember it when your paycheck starts to increase over time. Since I started in the trades, I started at $12 an hour. And it's hard for people to imagine that. It's hard for people to like change. You kind of get these golden handcuffs. If you end up coming out of college, getting a job that maybe pays you $60,000 a year, the idea of putting all that money in education and then starting over in the trades where you might start
or in
lower,
a deficit,
it's a tough reality, but the pace at which you can grow, especially with online education that you can supplement yourself with, or getting involved with a good company like Daniel Builders, the ability to be able to move up that rapidly to where it is not crazy to think that within 2-3 years you could double that.
Oh yeah.
That is a reality if you put the energy in, and then even more so, triple it, quadruple it. Like it is, the options are out there.
Yeah. And the reality right now, I mean, again, going back to culturally and where we're at, Sam makes a great point. The trades have been so underpopulated. There's such a high demand, such a lack of tradespeople at this point, that the opportunities are there.
Yeah.
And the pay has really started to jump and move to a point where people are trying to draw people into the trades. And so the compensation, you can go get a college education and make less money than you can in the trades many times now, depending on what you pick as your education and what you decide to do. The reality is, though, you can do really, really well as a tradesperson at this point in history. Like, there is so much opportunity and so much money in construction that, I mean, you can do really, really well for yourself.
Yeah, it's basic supply and demand.
Correct.
There is huge demand and there's very little supply, and someone's got to do the work. Especially when you start getting into more higher end work, which requires a lot of skill. It's a lot tougher. I mean, I would say there's a lot more supply when it comes to maybe doing more production style.
Sure.
When you're competing with a variety of people who don't have to necessarily know how to do some more intricate things. But when you get into that high end, like, you can really demand a pretty penny when you can have those kinds of skills.
That's right.
And then, of course, there's always the opportunities to move up more into management once you've gained a lot of these skills, you have these perspectives and this experience,
Which you guys exemplify, y'all. That was your story. I mean, you started out swinging a hammer and just kept growing.
And we were both lead carpenters in this company. So,
that's right.
Good stuff. Well, I hope that encouraged somebody, specifically a young person that may be considering carpentry or the trades. There is money to be made and not a lot of college debt to take on. This has been Ready, Set, Renovate. Until next time.
We're delighted you tuned in for today's episode of Ready, Set, Renovate, your guide design build resource. Are you ready for your home to undergo a transformation? We'd love to talk to you about it. Visit us at danielbuilders.com and tell us about the home renovation you envision. In the meantime, subscribe to Ready, Set, Renovate, and we'll keep the renovation inspiration coming.